everyone, welcome back to Show Me How to Win. We're visiting AEG House in Orange County, California, and we're talking to John Clair. John is a prolific designer. He's shown me how to win at 2 of his games so far, and we're here to ask him about Eco's first continent, his brand new game. So John, tell me, what's your inspiration for Ecos?
So Ecos was largely inspired by a game called Rise of Augustus. I was a big fan of Rise of Augustus. I think the card system in that game is great. I think the bingo mechanic in that game is a great core system for a simultaneous playstyle game. So I was inspired by the way the cards worked in that game, but my favorite part of Rise of Augustus was always when I could create sort of a synergy chain between my cards, where one card would trigger another card, which would trigger another card.
Only when things work out well for you, because you could really get unlucky with that game.
Sure. But that really wasn't, that was like a thing you could do in that game, but it wasn't what the game was about. It wasn't so much about building an engine with your cards as opposed to selecting just the right cards and then hoping they triggered off quick, right? So I was inspired by that, and I thought there was a really interesting design space with the way the cards could synergize, and an ability to craft sort of an engine with the cards in that bingo system. And then I also wanted it to have a very shared objective and game space from beyond the cards, which is why in Ecos what I did I had a shared landscape, which we're all communally building. But not we're competitively and communally building the same landscape.
Right. If I remember correctly, I believe in Rise of Augustus, you just look at your cards, and then there's nothing shared other than when you score, the person who got it first score more, right? That's pretty much it. But you don't build something together. Yeah,
there's no crossover between my engine, what my engine is doing, and stuff than other people's. It's all about scoring. So it's a meaningful interaction in Rise of Augustus in terms of trying to reach objectives before other people and choosing what objective you're going to go for based on what you're seeing other people going for. But there's nothing like my card becomes, the effects of my card become less powerful or more powerful based on some shared game space between the players, right?
That also allows for deeper strategy thinking and, planning and all that. So what about the theme? Why nature theme?
Well, so I love nature-themed games in general. It's where my brain goes to first when I start thinking about themes a lot of time.
Mystic Vale.
Yeah. And I really liked the idea of us communally building a landscape and having it gradually grow and having competing interests in what that landscape looks like.
Okay. So tell me, how do we play?
So in Ecos, Ecos is a card-driven game with a sort of a bingo core system. In the game, you're going to start, and in the first time you play the game, you'll start with a preset hand, and in future games, you'll draft your starting hand. You'll have 3 cards in play at the start of the game and 9 cards in hand, and every card in this game is unique. Some player will be what's called the Harbinger, and they'll have this bag, and they'll reach into the bag and they'll pull out a token. It'll have an icon on it. The distribution of icons in the bag is noted here, and we've sort of displayed it here from most common to least common.
Most sun, and then there's 2 deers and 2 wild, right?
Correct. So they'll reach into the bag, they'll pull out an icon, and then they'll place a cube that matches that, a cube on an icon on one of their cards that matches that icon. Eventually a player will, and we repeat that process.
So you only get to trigger one of them, not all of them, right? So I have a bunch of cards in front of me. Some might say sun, deer, and water. Some might say grass and whatever. So if somebody pulled out a sun, I only choose one sun to activate.
Yeah, so if I have a sun on multiple cards, I would pick which of them to cover with this cube, right? So I pull out a sun, I can put this on one of my sun icons on my cards, and then we just repeat that process. And all players are doing that simultaneously. When a card is completely full up, you say Eco, and if multiple players play say Eco at the same time, you resolve whoever has the bag in clockwise order. And then, so when you resolve a card, you remove the cubes from the card, you do the card effect, and then you rotate the card 1 turn clockwise, which counts how many uses the card has left. All cards can be used between 1 and 4 times. After its final use, it's removed from the game. So you can you're going to build an engine with your cards and ideally create synergies between the cards, but your engine will eventually sort of crumble away. You can't create an incredibly powerful engine and then just keep hitting it over and over again. Eventually, you'll have to reinfuse it with new things.
So would you say the more powerful ones can be used less times? Is that kind of like the norm?
Yeah. So in the sense of powerful, more powerful scoring cards will generally have fewer uses. There's some pretty powerful engine cards that don't actually score much on their own, but have the potential to drive a good engine, and those usually are 4-time uses, right? And those are the cards you really want to synergize well to power into your big scoring cards, because you can't use the scoring cards a ton of times. So the few uses you get for them, you really want to set those up and maximize as much as possible.
So what are some of the effects usually that will trigger on the card? Like I can see landscape here. I see like trees and mountains. I see tokens of, so basically some will let you maybe place a landscape, and the landscapes are like, so there's like, we got water, we have, so tell me about them.
So cards. There's 2 decks of cards. There's a brown deck and a blue deck. The brown deck largely has engine-y cards. Some of them are good for scoring, but for the most part, they're engine-driving cards. The blue cards tend to be more expensive and are more about scoring points. Again, with exceptions.
And when you say expensive, you mean harder to trigger?
That's what I mean. They will either and/or have more rare icons on them, or
like these.
and/or have more icons required. So cards will do a number of things. One of the primary things a card will do is it will add to the landscape. And there's a lot of strategy in how you add to the landscape, because so for example, this card, I don't know if the screen will be able to see it, but this card lets you place a water tile on the board. When you place a water tile, you can place it anywhere you want along the edge of the board, right? Now, this card doesn't actually care about where that tile goes. It just says place a water on the board, score a couple points, and then get a bonus icon, which I'll explain what that means in a sec. But it doesn't actually, that card itself that placed the water doesn't actually care where the water goes. But I should care where the water goes for a whole host of other reasons, including what cards I have, what cards other people have, what interpretation I've gained of what I think my opponents are trying to do to the landscape. And all of those factor into where and why I care about where that water might go. Other things cards will do, which is going to kind of drive your efficiency engine, is they'll give you new icons. So when I resolve this card, it gives me the ability to place a new water icon. So I might fill up this card, execute that ability, right, and then get to place a new one based on that ability onto a different card, which might execute another ability. And creating that synergy gives you a leg up in the ultimate race. That we're essentially racing to 80 points in this game.
Which is the mechanic you set out to design for this game anyway, because you said that was your inspiration. You really like that.
Yes, the
chaining
card synergies and chaining, absolutely. Yeah.
So we're gonna see a lot of that. If the cards are set up correctly, we're gonna get to see a lot of that in this game. So probably gonna be like a lot of turns where I'm doing this and this is triggering that, because usually you can only cover one of the icons, but if you have it set up correctly, you can probably have really efficient turns if you have things set up. So John already gave us like kind of like a small strategy tips there. On how to win at this, right? Make sure your turns are efficient. Do we miss anything else on the how to play? How does the game end?
So when someone pulls a wild token out of the bag, at that point we check to see if the game is over. So when I pull a wild, if any player has scored 80 or more points at that point, the game will end after everyone resolves that wild token.
What if it's not nobody has 80 yet?
Actually, I spoke that slightly wrong.
Okay.
After resolving the wild token, if anyone's over 80 points, they win. So I might be at 78 points, a wild token is pulled, I can use it to score 5 points, that gets me to 83, the game is over. Right? So we keep playing until at that point the game's over. What's also possible is someone pulls a sun out of the bag, which lets me trigger a score that gets me from 75 to 85, but it wasn't a wild, so the game's not over yet. So I'm in a position to win the game, but I need to stay in that position until the game actually ends, and other players have a chance to catch up.
Right. And there are only 2 wild in the whole bag, right?
There are 2 wilds in the whole bag, and we also have a 60 score. So you can, if you want to play a shorter game, you can also play to 60. 60 will usually end up being shorter, but again, because of that rule, I've seen games that people played to 60 points that end it when somebody got over 80 anyway, because the wild has to be pulled, right?
And if nobody has 60 or 80, you just put all the tokens back, and then the bag become the harbinger, the person who pulls out the tokens become the next person, and the players proceed, right?
Correct. Yeah, it just passes the next player.
So there always be 2 wilds in there normally.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. So these trees and mountains, how do we get them out? And the little animal tokens from the cards?
Yeah, so all cards will add everything to the board. The one card I showed added the water to the board, but you can also add grasslands. You can also add grasslands, deserts, so those tokens are double-sided. You can add mountains to the board. Mountains can be placed in any land space, not in water spaces.
You sure?
Yeah. You can add trees to the board, which can be placed in any grassland space, not in water either. They can be placed in any grassland space, or they can be placed on mountains, which means a desert with a mountain can have a tree because it can go in the mountain. And grassland spaces with a mountain can have 2 trees because one can be in the grassland, one can be in the mountain. So that's how trees get added to the board. And then finally, your cards will add animals to the board. There's actually 14 different types of animals in the game. In some cases, there's only a single card that places that type of animal.
Oh.
In some cases, there's multiple cards that will place that type of animal. So many games, you may never have a cheetah on the board. And in another game, a cheetah could be really important in the game, right? Depending on someone having that card and really trying to make good use of it. And animals have different requirements on where they can be placed. Like you can't place a shark in a desert.
No?
Right. But then, of course, how you use the animals is important. Some animals are predators. They're not. There's no like predator explicit rule in the game, right? But the shark ability removes other animals from the board and scores for having removed other animals from the board, right?
So you're saying this game is thematic?
Yeah, in some cases, yes. It's thematic enough that sharks don't live in deserts. Yes.
Okay, cool. So we covered the basic on how to play, and let's talk about how to win. So we already know that we have to set up our cards so that they have a synergy. What else should we pay attention to?
So a good strategy in this game will always involve long-term thinking from the very beginning. When you're using one of our preset hands, generally what you're going to play this game, you're going to play with a draft. And I've played this game a ton. I will always want a draft. But when you first play, you're going to have a preset hand because it's a lot of it's kind of too much information to take in the first time you play to try to draft, right? But in that preset hand, you're basically given what would be like a decent drafting hand. You did a pretty good job with the draft. It's the type of hand you would end up with. And when you have that kind of hand, you want to be looking toward the last third of the game with almost every move you make.
Because you start with only 3 cards out. You don't play them all out right away.
You start with 9 cards in your hand and 3 cards in play. Your opponents don't know what those 9 cards are, right? In those 9 cards is going to be some cards that have the potential to score a ton of points, right? The ways you fail to score those ton of points is you use the card too early, or your opponents figure out you have that card because you made the landscape too obvious that you have it, or you played the card early even if you didn't plan on using it, but now all your opponents know you scored for having a really big grassland on the board, and now they're going to spread the grass that they place all over the place, right? So you have some really big scoring potential in your hand that you kind of want to hide until you feel like you can play it. But even the simple moves early, which are like the example I gave earlier where I'm putting a water on the board, right? That effect doesn't care where the water goes, but I should really care where that water goes, right? Not just, and even if in my hand it doesn't seem like anything really cares too much about water, I want to see what my opponents are doing. Are they clumping all the water together? Are they trying to spread out the water? Are they trying to build a long line of water, right? Whatever they're trying to do, I don't want to contribute to it unless I feel like I have a card that could also benefit off of that, right? So even those small decisions matter. You really want to look at the synergy of icons on your cards, right? The ideal scenario to have in play is as close as possible to the actual distribution of tokens in the bag, right? Because you want to be able to use as many. You want to be using the tokens as they come out. Whenever something's pulled out of the bag and you can't use it, you get to rotate your little dial, which I don't think we talked about. And it has some very important effects on it. But those effects have limited use, right? They'll let you draw new cards, they'll let you gain new cubes, and they'll let you play cards from your hand. The one thing out of those three things you absolutely need to do to win the game is play more cards, right? You don't necessarily need more cubes, though it probably will help. And you don't necessarily need to draw more cards, though it probably will help. But if you're spending the whole game spinning this and drawing a bunch of cards, right, you're not going to win. You need to be playing cards and using the cards, right? So you want that distribution of icons to be similar to what's in the bag so that you'll be able to use the most possible energy as it comes out of the bag.
So basically, when we decide what 3 cards to play at the beginning, try not to play out your big points cards first because you want to be, number one, keep that to yourself so your opponents don't kind of sort of like start sabotaging what you're trying to do. Also, you can score more points towards the end because there's more landscape out there. So so that's number one. Also, when you play the cards, the mechanic cards, the engine cards, make sure that there's a kind of like an even distribution of icons. So if I don't want to just, even though there's more suns, I don't want to put out like a bunch of ones in the sun with suns because I only can activate one of them at a time. So instead of trying to, of course, I want to make sure I have the sun out because that's like the most common to be pulled. But also, I want to kind of like have an even distribution of all the different icons so that if somebody pulled out a icon, I always want to be able to activate it because doing whatever that's on the card is usually more helpful than turning the dial. So we didn't mention this. If you cannot do anything on your turn, you can spin that, and with 2 turns you get to play a card, right? Draw a new card. And then with if you choose to skip that, with a 3rd turn you get to play a card
or gain a new cube.
Yeah. And then you reset it to start. So even if you're stuck with whatever hand you have, you can use the turn thing to draw cards or play cards, right?
Right. So every time something's pulled out of the bag, you always have something to do. But within those options of what you can do, some things are better, right? Like filling out exactly the card you want to fill out right now is better than spinning this and getting to draw a new card or play a new card, right? But yes, so a lot of the game is about building towards a big scoring multiplier. Right. And a lot of times the cards that will, like I might have a card that scores based on having a lot of trees on the board, right? Well, placing trees on the board almost always comes from cards that require leaf icons, right? So I want to play a ton of trees on the board, but that means I'm going to have a ton of cards that have leaf icons, right? So a lot of that is trying to work around that. I don't want to just do that. I want something else that will work off other types of icons as well on the side. But if those cards can have the type of effects that then give me bonus leaf icons, then those 2 things I'm doing start synergizing across. So I might have a water strategy that wants to add fish to the board and then play a shark and eat them. But if the cards I'm playing along that process are also giving me leaves, that then bleeds into a forest strategy at the same time, right?
Yeah, and based on what you're saying, if you see a player starting to build a bunch of water, then you know they're up to something. And you look at their cards, and if you see a lot of water symbols, then either maybe activate cards that will let you disrupt that, or piggyback on their whatever it is they're doing. So you got somebody basically sitting on points for you.
Yeah, there's absolutely the noticing what someone else is doing, and either recognizing you have a card that can benefit from it, or digging for a card that can benefit from it. It's possible you get yourself in a spot where you're like, I think I'm doing okay, but it looks like what they got going is really good. And then you have to make that decision of, can I win with what I have, or do I need to dig in for something that might be able to piggyback off what they're doing and catch up, right?
Or just start sabotaging them if you are in a winning position.
Yeah, or dig for something that can sabotage them. So there's some cards that have bonkers multipliers if it's set up properly, right? But just the right card can screw up that setup, right? And you either have that card and you want to hide it until they wasted a bunch of time setting it up, and then you can try to execute it before they can get a big score off of it, and you can block maybe 30% of that big score or something, right? Or you dig for it, right? And it depends on reading the board state, right? It depends on if you think, you know what, I think they can get that big score, but I also have something good going, and I can do it anyway, or whether you need to try to get in their way.
So you can play this game basically if you focus on what you're doing, or you can basically making sure that, nobody's running away with something. There's many different ways to do it, depending on what cards come your way. So let's talk about, so those are some of the general things that everybody should pay attention to. When you mentioned drafting, so and if this is not your first game, is there something we should pay attention to when we're drafting?
Right. So starting with game 2 or maybe game 3, you'll want to start drafting. I think drafting's a ton of fun in this game because they're within our preset hands. There's a whole bunch of different types of strategies baked in, but there's a whole bunch more depending on what you draft that you could end up with. How the draft works is it first starts with you draft 4 of the blue cards, which are sort of the bigger scoring endgame cards, and then you draft your engine cards. So you're going to get to basically get cards at the start that have big potential, and then you're going to try to draft into things that can flow into that and maximize as best as possible that potential.
That's nice. You let people know what they're shooting for before giving them the cards that they can shoot with.
Absolutely. So you want in your first 4 cards, you kind of want 2 goals. And if you get goals that overlap beautifully, that's great, right? Good for you. But often you want 2 goals that use different types of symbols going at the same time, right? So you're looking for at least 2 blue cards that will have big potential and use different icons, right?
Right, because like you say, you want to diversify.
Right. And then you go into the brown card draft and you're looking for cards that do one of several things. They either give you the icons that you need to pop off those big cards, right? So when you play that big card, you can get it off really quick, right? Or they're cards that will set up whatever multiplier you need for the bigger cards to get it. And then if you can grab cards that give you the ability to play cards more efficiently, like they have an effect that says, place a water on the board and play a card, right? That means you can do 2 things. So instead of having to waste some turns here just to play a card, you can then play a card more efficiently with that. So you're looking for, those are always good. And then everything else you want to ideally either add to some multiplier on the board or give you synergy ability within the symbols to get into the effects you need to set up the board or to execute on the board more efficiently.
Okay, and while we're on the subject of cards, if for some reason your plan didn't go your way, or it's time to draw cards or play cards, like, is there something that is there a timing on what's a good timing to go to dig through cards, or like when should we get new cards, or should we focus on that at all?
So it's not super inefficient to draw cards. In an ideal draft, or even a good but not ideal draft, you won't need new cards for much of the game, and maybe even the whole game. You can get by with just your 12. But if you feel like you're missing something important with your 12 cards early in the game, you might want to dig for something. And usually that's because you feel like you ended up with brown cards that could go down a certain path, but you don't have anything that can score off that path. You might want to hunt here a little bit. And every 2 turns of this dial, meaning 2 things are pulled that you didn't like, you can draw a new card, right? So it's actually not super inefficient to hunt for cards. It's not ideal, but it's something you can do.
We didn't mention you can also get more activation tokens with the dial, right?
Yeah, so getting more cubes is sort of the thing you do if you feel happy with what you've got in terms of your cards. Then you want more cubes because that gives you the flexibility to work on more cards at once, essentially. What often happens in terms of getting new cards is you get into the middle of the game, and at that point you can
kind of see where things are going.
Right, you've spent some time trying to set up the board the way you want it, and so has everyone else. And at that point, you get a feeling of whether the board is heading in the direction you want it to go. You get a feeling of what other people are trying to do, and at that point, you need to make a determination if what the cards you have are going to get you the rest of the way there, or if you need to dig for something that either will help you get there because will cover sort of a hole you've got in your card set, or is something you need to use to, like you said, piggyback off an opponent or counteract what they're setting up fairly efficiently right now. And sort of in the middle of the game is where you need to start recognizing and making that determination of whether you're going to need more cards or not.
Okay, good. I think we cover most of it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm really looking forward to playing this game because I like Rise of Augustus, but I always feel like it is too short and there's not much to it. When you're played it, you're like, oh man, that was fast, and it was just kind of like if I get what I need, then great. But if I don't, I just spend the whole time basically like, oh, I'm so unlucky. But this one, even if I don't get the cards I need, I can still do other things and I can pay attention to what other people are doing. So I feel like there's a lot of deep strategy in this, depending on how I set up my cards. Also, there's pulling out the tokens. It is sort of luck based, but if you have your card set up correctly, doesn't matter what they pulled out, you should be able to utilize it anyway. And having the dial, even if you don't get what you need, be able to turn it to get something bonus is nice, so that I don't feel like, oh, I had a bad turn, because at least I can play a card later or dig for a card later. And I love the theme. I love the little animal tokens. I love that you have built-in mechanics in there where you can sort of mess up other people's big setup. I enjoy doing things like that. So when can we get this game?
This game will be available end of October.
So after SM, basically. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you, John, so much for showing me Ecos, how to play, how to win, and thank you guys for watching.
Thanks.